there are just so many layers. Already we have people trying to fight for their physical health. And then we have people who are underinsured or uninsured just trying to get to the hospitals to be sure that they have treatments. And then on top of that, we have the racism, we have all the senseless shootings, now the mass shootings and hate crimes. So yes, all of these things can really be quite overwhelming for mental health. But what I'm finding, especially
Welcome back to The World Tonight. We are joined now by Dr. Frita Fisher, founder and president of Midtown Atlanta Nephrology, and still with us, Dr. Sharon Anderson, author of The New Standard of Global Civility. Dr. Fisher, let me begin with you. When you throw everything into the pot of COVID-19, mass shootings, vaccine fears, death, school closings, anxiety, depression, and racism and rage, where are we as a nation and where are we headed mentally? How is this all playing out in our collective and mental and physical health?
Oh my goodness, Kelly, you just gave the ingredients for the makings of a disaster. So yes, there are just so many layers all at once with this pandemic, as you mentioned. Already we have people trying to fight for their physical health. And then we have people who are underinsured or uninsured just trying to get to the hospitals to be sure that they have treatments. And then on top of that, we have the racism, we have all the senseless shootings, now the mass shootings and hate crimes, and vaccine access issues and people talking about vaccine acceptance when a lot of times it's just a matter of the vaccines not being readily accessible to people of color and Blacks. So yes, all of these things can really be quite overwhelming for mental health. But the good thing is that there are so many healthcare providers and physicians and scientists and counselors out here doing the good work, trying to show the silver lining, because there is a light at the end of the tunnel. We are getting more and more vaccine access for COVID-19. And what I'm finding, especially during this pandemic and with the summer and the protests, that a lot of people who have been privileged for the first time are starting to see the real disparities and how policemen treat one group versus another on January 6th during the insurrection. And so it's been a lot, Kelly, but I'm still optimistic that there will be good that comes out of it.
There is a saying that Dr. Janetta Cole mentioned earlier in our show, that when America catches a cold, the Black community catches pneumonia. And that seems to ring especially true in this moment with everything going on. When we look at the disparities due to legal, economic, and social issues as it relates to Black communities, it's almost like we've normalized this trauma, right, for these communities of color. Dr. Anderson, what are your thoughts on trauma being normalized and how we work out of that?
Absolutely. I think that's a wonderful point. And unfortunately, that is a true statement. And I would 100% agree that we have been so used to marginalizing the African American community and communities of color that we take it for granted that indeed, as the doctor said, the pandemic can disproportionately affect people of color. And so our responses are based on what seems normal to us, as opposed to addressing what we consider in the health field social determinants that affect our health. And so how do we come out of it is to really begin to look at the data and study the data and listen to those who are being disproportionately affected, because only through the education and the knowledge can we begin to tailor solutions that actually address the African American community and people of color. And I would be optimistic as well. We can do it. And I do believe that the pandemic tore the Band-Aid off of what occurred and is requiring us and is forcing us to take that look.
I want to drill down on your point just a little bit more about your being optimistic, as well as I know that Dr. Fisher's optimistic. Where does faith come into the picture, since Black Americans are often known as being the conscience of America and trying to heal the soul of America? Where does faith play a role in helping them not only overcome this from a psychiatric standpoint and a sociological standpoint, but also from a faith that sustains them and that kind of overcoming those situations through their faith?
Thank you for that question. I think, as you know from my bio, I'm also an executive pastor. So faith means a lot to me, and faith means a lot to the African American community. You will see now the African American church standing up even more in our communities than before. African American churches are leading in making sure that the dialogue and the narrative regarding vaccination is clear and true so that the African American community can overcome that stigma as it relates to vaccination. It is the African American church that will continue to remind the minority community that with God, all things are possible. And so without faith, the Bible says that the faith without works is dead, and without faith, nothing is possible. And so faith and connecting with the community of faith, I believe, is going to be critical in order for us to overturn what's occurring in our society, the pervasive mental health issues, the pervasive physical issues. I was on a panel or facilitated a panel this weekend, and we talked about, while the pandemic is an issue, the social determinants that affect African Americans has been ongoing for years. So high rates of diabetes, high rates of blood pressure, high rates of heart disease, not because Black Americans eat fried chicken, but simply because the water is not good, the access to food is not good. And so while all of this is overwhelming, we as a people have always stood on the fact that we can do all things with Christ who strengthens us. And so I do believe that faith is what is bringing us out as a population and as a demographic, and will continue to do so.
Well, there's certainly a value in community gathering and fellowship across all faiths at this point, and anything that can be done to bring our communities together. Dr. Frita Fisher, founder and president of Midtown Atlanta Nephrology, Dr. Sharon Anderson, author of New Standard of Global Civility. Thank you both so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, today is Equal Pay Day for women, a day for action, not celebration, advocates say. And coming up next on The World Tonight, what can men do to help bridge the pay gap divide? Men, are we sensitive enough to do that? And how does the gap in pay specifically affect Black women? We will break it all down for you next. Stay right where you are. More after the break.